The owner sat in the corner booth, just another customer, or so everyone thought. But when he saw his waitress serving coffee with a broken hand and bruises she tried to hide, he knew something was terribly wrong. What he uncovered that day would shock the entire diner. The smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee lingered in the air, mixing with the low hum of chatter that filled the diner. It was an ordinary Thursday morning, or so it seemed. The corner booth by the frosted window had always been Harold's favorite spot. But no one here knew that Harold wasn't just another customer with a newspaper and a black coffee. He owned this place. Every tile, every booth, every shining chrome edge belonged to him. But today, Harold wasn't the man with the big name on the paperwork. Today, he was just another face in the crowd. An undercover owner watching his business run without anyone knowing who he was. He believed in walking the floors unnoticed, blending in to see the truth beneath polished smiles and corporate reports. Numbers could lie. People rarely did when they thought no one was watching. But what Harold saw that morning made his stomach knot in a way quarterly losses never could. A waitress in a faded blue uniform moved between tables, her steps careful, her jaw set tight as if pain clung to her every movement. Denise Carter. He'd read her name on the schedule. She was young, maybe late 20s, with skin the color of rich earth and eyes that carried stories no one had time to hear. A patterned scarf held back her curls, but it couldn't hide the sheen of sweat on her brow or the stiffness in her arm as she balanced trays. Harold noticed her left hand, wrapped in white bandages, rigid like a broken wing. Yet, there she was, weaving through the maze of tables, balancing plates with her good arm, smiling at customers as if nothing hurt. That kind of grit wasn't common. It caught Harold's attention like a flash of light in the dark. He watched her slide a plate of eggs and toast onto a table, murmuring a soft, "Here you go, sweetheart," to an older woman who thanked her with a warm smile. Denise nodded, that same small, practiced smile never leaving her lips. But the moment she turned away, Harold saw it. The flicker of pain, the quick inhale, the subtle shake of her fingers as if they were on fire. His instinct was to call her over, to ask if she needed help. But before he could, another voice sliced through the hum of the diner like a whip. "Carter, what the hell is taking so long on table 6? The voice came from behind the counter, sharp and dripping with irritation. Harold turned. A tall man in a grease-stained apron stood there, his lips curled in a sneer. Ross, the manager. Harold had met him once during a formal meeting. A handshake and a polite smile. But this man, this version, looked nothing like the charming employee who'd promised to keep the place running smooth as butter. "I'm getting to it now," Denise said, her tone even, measured like someone who had learned that calmness was her only shield. "Well, hurry the hell up," Ross snapped, slamming an order ticket onto the counter. "You think people got all day to wait on your slow ass?" A few customers glanced over, eyebrows raised, but no one said a word. They rarely did. People didn't like to get involved. Harold felt his jaw tighten, his grip on the coffee cup firming. He forced his eyes to Denise, searching for anger, shame, something. But she only nodded, her face a mask of quiet endurance. She picked up the next tray and walked away without a word. Something inside Harold shifted. Anger simmered in his gut, hot and heavy. He wasn't just watching an employee get chewed out for being slow. No, this was something else. He saw it in Ross's eyes, the way they lingered on Denise, sharp and assessing, not just critical but cruel. And Harold had seen enough of the world to recognize the undertones others pretended didn't exist. This wasn't about slow service. This was about power, about putting someone in their place. Denise moved to the next table, her steps wobbling slightly. Harold noticed her sleeve slip up as she leaned forward to pour coffee, revealing bruises blooming like purple shadows along her forearm. His stomach sank. Broken hand, bruises, and still working shifts in a place that barely paid enough to keep the lights on. Why? Why would anyone push themselves like that unless they had no choice? He needed answers. But first, he needed to listen to watch. The door chimed as new customers walked in, and the rush grew heavier. Denise kept moving, silent, efficient. Every motion laced with pain she refused to let spill over. Ross kept barking orders, his voice a constant snarl above the clatter of dishes. No, please. No, thank you. Just commands, sharp, demeaning, deliberate. As Harold sipped his coffee, he wondered how long this had been happening under his roof. How many times had Ross spoken like that when no one was watching? How many times had Denise swallowed her pride just to keep her job? Reports painted Ross as reliable and hardworking. But reports didn't show bruises. They didn't record the quiet moments where dignity bled out in the name of survival. Harold's pulse drummed in his ears. This wasn't just a bad day. This was a pattern. And Denise, she was at the center of it, bearing a weight no one seemed to care about. But Harold cared. Because this wasn't just his business. These were his people. And what he was seeing wasn't just mismanagement. It was something uglier. Something that clawed at the edges of justice, of humanity. And Harold Carter was not the kind of man who could sit back and let that stand. The diner grew busier as the morning slipped toward noon. Conversation swelled into a low roar. Silverware clinked against plates, and the smell of frying onions drifted in from the kitchen. Harold kept his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable, but his mind was far from calm. Every time Ross barked across the counter, Harold's pulse kicked harder. Every time Denise flinched, barely noticeable, like a leaf trembling in the wind, his gut clenched tighter. He needed to know more. An accusation without proof would solve nothing. If Ross had the audacity to humiliate an employee in public, Harold couldn't imagine what happened behind closed doors. But before he made a move, he needed the full picture. The why, the how, the truth that hid between Denise's brave face and her broken hand. When Denise finally slipped behind the counter to refill the coffee pots, Harold seized the chance. He approached slowly, timing his steps so his voice would carry softly, not like Ross's sharp-edged tone. "Excuse me," he said, lifting his empty cup. "Mind topping me off?" Denise turned, the same polite smile forming like muscle memory. "Of course." She took the pot with her good hand, but Harold noticed the tremor in her grip, the strain in her wrist as she steadied the handle. "Thank you," he said quietly as she poured, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You okay? Looks like you're pushing through something." For a fraction of a second, her mask slipped. Her eyes darted up to his, dark, searching, startled. But then she blinked it away and curved her lips into that practiced smile again. "I'm fine, sir. Just a little sore. Comes with the job." Harold let out a soft hum. "Not pushing. Not yet." "Well, you're handling it better than most would." "That's impressive." A flicker passed across her face. Gratitude? Suspicion? Maybe both. She nodded and started to turn away, but Harold caught a whisper of words beneath her breath. Something like, "Gotta handle it." No choice. He pretended not to hear, but his mind grabbed onto that sentence like a lifeline. No choice. What kind of life left a woman with no choice but to work injured? Ross's voice cut through before Harold could say more. "Carter, quit chatting and get table 8 cleared. Or is that too much for you with your—" He stopped, but Harold didn't miss the venom in his glance toward her bandaged hand. Neither did Denise. Her jaw tightened. She gave Harold a polite nod and hurried off, tray balanced against her hip. Harold stood there for a moment, blood heating under his skin. Ross's tone wasn't just harsh. It dripped with something deeper, something designed to chip away at her dignity piece by piece. This wasn't discipline. It was domination. Harold slid back into his booth, jaw set. He had two options: storm over, rip Ross apart in front of the whole diner, and blow his cover, or play the long game, gather enough truth to ensure Ross never had a chance to twist this story into his own favor. Harold chose patience. For now, he pulled out his phone under the table, pretending to scroll while his camera caught Ross snapping at a busboy, yanking an order slip from Denise's hand hard enough to make her wince, then muttering something low and cruel. Harold couldn't catch the words over the clatter of dishes, but the look in Ross's eyes was enough. Hours passed, the rush easing into a lull. Denise moved slower now, exhaustion dragging at her like chains. Harold wondered when she'd last had a real break. When she finally disappeared into the back, he slipped out of his booth and followed, careful to keep his footsteps soft. The hallway smelled of grease and something faintly metallic. He found her near the supply room, leaning against the wall with her eyes closed, cradling her bandaged hand like it was made of glass. For a moment, she looked like a statue, still, silent, carved from exhaustion. Harold hesitated. Approaching her now could scare her, make her shut down completely. But before he could decide, Ross's voice echoed from the kitchen. "You hiding back here?" Heavy footsteps followed. Harold stepped into a shadowed corner, just as Ross appeared. His smile was tight, teeth flashing without warmth. "No, sir," Denise said quickly, pushing off the wall. "Just needed." "You needed what?" "Permission?" Ross stepped closer, his voice dropping low. "You think I don't see you milking this little accident for sympathy? Walking around like some damn martyr?" Denise's chin lifted, but her voice stayed calm, almost too calm. "I'm doing my job, Ross." "Not good enough," he snapped. Then quieter, softer, but sharp as glass. "Maybe I should start looking for someone who doesn't whine every time she chips a nail." Harold's hands curled into fists, nails digging into his palms. He wanted to step out, to end this right now. But Ross wasn't done. "You want to keep this job?" Ross leaned in, so close Harold could see Denise flinch. "Then quit making me look bad out there. You hear me?" A beat of silence. Denise nodded once, her lips pressed tight. Ross smirked, gave her a mock pat on the shoulder that made Harold's stomach churn, then walked away whistling like nothing had happened. When Ross's footsteps faded, Denise stayed there, staring at the floor like the weight of the whole world was pressing down. And Harold knew, this wasn't just about workplace bullying. This was about survival, about a woman standing in the crossfire of life, fighting battles no one saw. And Harold Carter had just declared war. That night, Harold sat in his truck across from the diner, engine humming low, eyes fixed on the neon sign flickering in the dark. His thoughts were a storm. He'd walked out without a word after Ross's little display. But silence didn't mean surrender. If anything, it gave Harold time to think. And Harold was dangerous when he thought. Denise wasn't just an employee to him anymore. She was a symbol of something bigger, of how easily dignity could be stripped when the wrong person held power. He couldn't shake the image of her standing there, shoulders squared against humiliation, clutching her broken hand like it was her last defense. What kind of life cornered someone like that? What kind of weight did she carry that made enduring Ross seem better than the alternative? The only way to answer those questions was to dig deeper. So Harold started where any man with resources would, with information. Back at his office, he pulled Denise's file. Basic stuff, neat and clinical. Hire date, 8 months ago. Emergency contact, none. No family listed. Previous jobs, cashier, housekeeper, waitress at a chain restaurant. All minimum wage. All dead ends. It didn't explain the bruises. It didn't explain the broken hand. So Harold went further. He called in a favor from an old friend who owed him more than one. A few clicks, a few quiet conversations, and the pieces started to come together. Denise Carter, age 29, born and raised on the East Side. One of those neighborhoods the city forgot. Graduated high school with honors, started college on a scholarship, until life punched harder than ambition. Her mother died when Denise was 19. Her younger brother, Harold, winced at the report. Killed in a robbery gone wrong 2 years later. Father? Gone before she could walk. No safety nets. Just a woman trying to keep her head above water in a world that didn't care if she drowned. Medical bills from her brother's death still sat on her credit report like rusted anchors. And then the final detail, the one that twisted Harold's gut. A domestic violence case from 3 years ago. Denise as the victim. Charges dropped because the guy disappeared before trial. No wonder she flinched when Ross got too close. Harold leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as anger burned through him. Denise wasn't weak. She was a fighter. Every scar, every line in that report screamed resilience. And here she was, breaking herself in half to keep a job that paid pennies. Because walking away wasn't an option when the rent was due and the world didn't offer second chances. He thought about Ross then, about his smirk, his casual cruelty. Harold had trusted that man to run his diner with integrity. Instead, Ross turned it into a stage for his ego, using power like a weapon. Harold's fists tightened. Not anymore. The next morning, Harold walked into the diner early, before the rush. He wore the same plain jacket, the same easy smile that said customer, not boss. Denise was already there, tying her apron with slow, careful movements. She looked tired. No, beyond tired. Like someone running on fumes, held together by sheer will. "Morning," Harold said softly as he slid onto a stool at the counter. She glanced up, surprised, then offered that polite smile again. "Morning, sir. Coffee? Please." He watched as she poured, her bandaged hand trembling slightly when she set the pot down. "Listen," he began, keeping his voice low. "You don't know me, and I don't want to overstep, but if you ever need help, real help, I want you to know there are people who care." Denise froze. Her eyes lifted to his, sharp and guarded. "Why would you say that?" Harold held her gaze, steady. "Because you look like someone carrying too much alone." For a heartbeat, he thought she might shut down, turn away. But then her shoulders sagged, just a little, like someone letting go of a breath they didn't know they were holding. "It's fine," she murmured, looking away. I can't afford to stop. Not now." "Because of him?" Harold asked carefully, tilting his head toward the back where Ross's voice rumbled faintly. Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Before Harold could say more, Ross stormed out of the kitchen, face twisted in irritation. "Carter, you done flirting? Or you planning to work today?" Denise stiffened. "I was just—" "Save it," Ross barked, then turned to Harold with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything good here, sir?" Harold smiled back, calm and easy. "Perfect," he said. But inside, the storm was raging. Ross strutted off, muttering under his breath. Denise's hands trembled as she grabbed a rag and started wiping the counter like her life depended on it. Harold leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You won't have to deal with him much longer." She blinked, startled, but before she could ask what he meant, a new group of customers walked in, pulling her away. Harold sat back, watching her go, his decision solid as stone. Today, he'd play the quiet observer one last time. But when this day ended, so would Ross's reign. And Harold wasn't just planning to fire a man. He was planning to make a statement. One that echoed far beyond the walls of this diner. Because sometimes justice wasn't loud. Sometimes it started in silence, with a man in a corner booth, watching, waiting, and ready to burn the whole damn playbook to protect what mattered. The lunch rush was chaos, plates clattering, voices rising, orders flying like sparks. Harold sat in his usual booth, calm as the eye of a storm, watching Ross pace behind the counter like a king surveying his kingdom. Denise moved through the din like a shadow, her face composed but pale. the tremor in her injured hand growing worse with every passing minute. Harold could feel her pain from across the room, and it tore at him like glass. This was the last day Ross would stand in this diner, wearing authority like a crown. Harold wasn't leaving until he made sure of it. He waited until the rush thinned, the tables clearing one by one. Denise disappeared into the back to restock, and Ross leaned against the counter scrolling through his phone, smirking like a man who thought the world bent to his will. Perfect timing. Harold stood, his step steady, his chest tight with purpose. He walked to the center of the floor, letting his voice cut through the low hum of conversation. "Ross," he said, tone casual but carrying weight. The manager glanced up, annoyance flashing before he replaced it with a fake smile. "Sir?" Ross drawled. "Everything okay? Need a refill?" "No," Harold said simply. "I need you to take off that apron." Ross blinked, then chuckled like he'd misheard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Harold said, his voice calm even. "You're done here." A ripple of silence spread through the diner. Heads turned. Denise reappeared in the doorway, tray in hand, eyes wide. Ross laughed, louder this time. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he sneered, stepping forward. "You don't get to fire me." Harold smiled, slow and cold. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather wallet. Not with cash, but with an embossed card. He placed it on the counter, sliding it toward Ross with deliberate calm. "Owner, Harold Carter." The color drained from Ross's face like someone pulled the plug. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. You're the man who trusted you with this place," Harold cut in, his voice like steel. "The man who believed you'd treat people with respect, not run this diner like your personal kingdom." Ross stammered something, but Harold raised a hand, silencing him. "I've been here for 2 days, Harold said, his voice rising just enough to carry to every corner of the diner. "Watching, listening, and what I've seen. A manager who uses humiliation as a weapon, who preys on people who can't fight back, who forgets that dignity is worth more than any tip jar." A murmur swept through the room. Denise stood frozen, eyes locked on Harold, disbelief etched across her face. "You think I didn't notice her hand?" Harold's voice cracked like thunder as he pointed toward Denise. "Broken, wrapped in bandages. And she's still here, working twice as hard as anyone else, because life didn't give her the luxury of quitting. And instead of support, you gave her cruelty. Instead of compassion, you gave her hell." Ross's face flushed crimson. "This is ridiculous." "No," Harold said sharply, stepping closer, his gaze cutting like a blade. "What's ridiculous is that you thought no one would hold you accountable. That ends now." He turned toward Denise, his voice softening like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Denise, you've carried more than anyone should, and you've done it with grace that humbles me. From this moment on, you'll never have to answer to men like him again." She stared at him, lips trembling, words stuck somewhere between shock and relief. I don't understand." "You don't have to," Harold said gently. "Just know you're safe, and you're valued." The diner erupted, not in chaos, but in quiet applause that swelled like a tide. Customers clapped, some nodding in approval, others murmuring words Denise couldn't quite hear over the roar in her ears. Her throat tightened. For months she'd swallowed her pain, buried her pride just to survive. And now, here was this man standing in the wreckage of her silence, building something better in its place. Ross sputtered, eyes darting like a trapped animal. You can't just. You've got 5 minutes to clear out," Harold said, his voice calm again, almost bored. "And if I hear you so much as whisper about this place, I'll make sure you never run so much as a lemonade stand again." Ross glared, but the fight was gone. He ripped off his apron, tossed it on the counter, and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. The sound echoed like a gavel striking wood. For a long moment, the diner held its breath. Then Harold turned to Denise, offering a small smile. Why don't you take the rest of the day off? Paid, of course. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. I don't know how to thank you. You already have, Harold said softly, by reminding me why this place exists. Not for profits, for people, for you. And as Denise walked out into the sunlight, something inside her, something buried deep under years of struggle, rose again. Not as a fairy tale, but as something real, something earned. Justice, dignity, and the quiet, unyielding strength of a woman who refused to break, even when everything else tried to. If this story touched your heart, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you love stories that reveal strength, justice, and hope, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Your support helps keep these stories alive.